Hi there, and welcome to another episode of African Business Stories, your insight into female innovators and entrepreneurs building and running businesses in Africa. I'm Akego Koye, and on the show today, I'll be chatting with Nichole Yembra, the founder and managing partner of the Chrysalis Capital, an investment management firm focused on early stage tech companies in Africa. We talk about leaving the continent as a child, returning as an adult, meeting President Barack Obama, stereotypes she faces in Nigeria, and growing a truly Pan-African investment fund. Yes, it was an all-encompassing conversation. Let's get into it. Hey, Nichole, welcome to African Business Stories.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome, awesome. Reading about you has been quite interesting and exciting, I must say. I read that you moved to the US when you were 11 and that you're a huge Kobe Bryant fan. And if you can just tell us a little bit about that, that would be a great way to start.
So basically, I was actually, born in the US, went back to Nigeria a couple months later, like, every other anchor baby, and was in Nigeria for 9 years. When my mom passed, my family felt it was better for, me to be in the US, kind of being able to focus and kind of just get this different new opportunity. So I moved abroad and I was with my family in Texas and then Wisconsin. So I was actually born in Wisconsin, so it was a little kind of weird to go back there.
Mm.
And I was like this really tall kid. And when I got to Wisconsin, and I think I was like 5'4" at 11, which is ridiculous. And so, get into this new school, and they're like, here, go play basketball. Now, when I was in Nigeria, I ran track. I was actually the youngest person on our inter-house sports team at Chrysalis. So I've always been athletic, but I'd never picked up a basketball before. And my brain, the way it works is like once I get into a new thing, I want to be obsessive about it and I want to be the best at it. So I go home, turn on the TV to try to study basketball, and I see, Kobe Bryant. And he's young, he's 18, he's going out of high school and going straight into the league, and everyone's talking about him and his focus, his just drive, everything. And I was like, I want to be that. I want to love that man. I want to be that man. I want to like everything. But like literally for his whole entire career, everything he did was about perfection. It didn't bother him so much if people said, talked about him or they didn't like him. He just worked hard. So at the end of the day, he was like, you will respect me. You will want to be around me because if you put your faith in me, I will win. Right. And so funny enough, as we get older, I start realizing we have the same personality type. We have the same kind of thing with everyone. Like you may be mad at us, you may feel, one way or another, but we're so good at what we do, right? Like that you can't really deny that. So I mean, he was literally a huge part of me adjusting to America via
Right.
sports, via learning about the culture, via just seeing an independent thinker that didn't follow the path that everyone told you to go to kind of
Right.
create this new future. So, yeah, my
So
love
how
for
long did you
Kobe.
play basketball for?
All the way through junior year in high school. So what was that like 16, 17? But I was a 4 year like varsity athlete for track. So it kind of got to that place in high school where it was like, you're pretty good at basketball, but you're really, really good at track. And so, like I won a state championship my junior year in high school. Actually, my relay team actually still has the record in my high school for our 4x1 race that we won the state
Wow.
championship with. So, so like it kind of was like, okay, pick your sport really. And so it ended up being track, but it didn't end, right? Like
Hmm.
because again, it was about excellence. Like it was less about the sports, but more about the man, right? And the lessons and the discipline and all of that. And so, yeah, so it just kind of stayed, with me for my whole life.
Wow, that's interesting. And didn't you at some point try to start a fitness company?
I did, but like I started trying to do it from like the perspective that makes sense for me. So me and one of my best friends, we went to college together. We literally met like the summer before freshman year started, and we were super close since. We basically were like everybody, and it's crazy. If we had started it, we would be filthy, filthy rich today because
Right.
everybody online is a personal trainer or a nutritionist or doing some email me for my online program, blah, blah, blah. And at the time, we're like, imagine if there was a platform where it could, people could sign in and then they're able to get like their recommendations. They could say, oh, I don't like yogurt or I have this allergy, and the system stores it instead of people like emailing plans. Even like LA Fitness, when you get a personal trainer, you get a
Mhm.
book and they'll be like, writing stuff in about your exercise plans. We're like, imagine if that was in an app. And we worked and we spent all this money, but what I realized is about it's like it's timing. Like, and one of my favorite TED Talks ever talks about the most important key to success in business and life really is about timing. And when we
Mhm.
wanted to do that, besides like the technology timing, but also just like the mental readiness. I didn't know how to build a tech company, neither did Sean. I said, but today I've now invested in and built over 20 something plus tech companies. So much different. We actually thought about it. We're like, if we actually tried to do this today with the
Right.
network knowledge, we would do so much better than what we tried to do, 7 years ago, because we didn't have all the resources. We had this great idea, but we didn't know how to build a company, and especially a technology company, right? So we
Right.
wanted to be on the business side of it to support all the athletes, the trainers, the nutritionists, and all of those types of things. And we tested it out. We built the first version of the app. Like, funny enough, I actually had my dad use it. Like, I customized meal plans for him and exercise plans. So he actually was one of my like testers and a few of my friends. Like, so we did all that work, but we just weren't ready. Like the timing was not ready, to build a company back then.
It's all about timing. Okay, so you went on to college and studied accounting, and then you went to work for EY.
Yeah. So actually in undergrad, I studied business and Spanish, and then my master's is in accounting.
Okay,
But
got you.
the master's in accounting was because of EY. So EY has been a huge part of my life. Basically, I met them when I was 20 years old, and I left at 29. Right. So I joke
Right.
around and say that like I've had four jobs my whole life, like, and so like literally I've had four jobs my entire life. So meeting the team at EY, I was studying business, and so I figured I was like it's foundational to everything. And Keaton Flagler was like number 5 undergrad business school in the country, and I studied Spanish because I was just super obsessed with the culture. So I studied abroad in Spain, China, all kinds of stuff to bring all of that together. And then did my internship with EY, and they were like, "Oh, well, if you want to be a partner, you have to get a CPA." And it's not untrue, but if I knew then I could be a principal or something else, I didn't have to get a CPA, I probably wouldn't have a master's in accounting.
Right.
And then they, also helped me pay for my master's program. So it was great, like meeting people that believed in you from when you were 20. Like, I did 2 internships with EY, got my master's paid for, then started, in the risk practice. And what I
Mm.
did learn though was all the, I say, I'm sorry to forget Chris, all your stuff. I say the boring shit, but the boring stuff for for your podcast is like, I learned that though, right? I learned all the debits and credits. I learned how to read what makes sense. So a lot of times when companies and founders are selling these ideas, my brain fundamentally goes, does that make sense? Like, in just basic principles. And that was what EY set as that foundation, right? That layer of being like, based off of business models you've seen all over the world, based off of just accounting and numbers and how
Mm.
things work, does this make sense, right? And it was such a foundation for everything that I do now. So, really great to have a general business background in finance,
Right.
but then master's in accounting, like, layered it with the more boring stuff, but it's such a critical part of actually growing a company.
That's excellent. That's excellent. So did you always want to move back to Nigeria, or how did the itch come?
I was that person that was like, I would never go to that godforsaken country like ever. I was like, I loved my life in America because I traveled. Like, I literally spent 80% of my time while I was working like all over, right? And it was never about going to Nigeria. So I joke around and say that I move with the universe. So people can call it God, people call it whatever you want to call it, but I always just say like the universe tells me what to do. So when I started at EY with my mentor, my staff 1 year, I was like, I want to live somewhere in Asia. I want to live in Brazil, and then let's figure it out after that. And she's like, okay, let's figure out how that works. And so I got to, live in Brazil. I got to live in Thailand. And when I was in Brazil, I was just like, yo, Rio is like Lagos. Like it's what Lagos could be, right? I was like,
Right.
and then, going up, just traveling around Brazil and seeing like African culture, but then they're just speaking Portuguese. And I'm like, there could be so much potential, right? And I think that
Right.
the joke around about like getting more and more woke in my 20s, like I start understanding like institutional racism. I start understanding the systems. I start understanding the microaggressions. And me as a person, the thing I crave the most in life is like freedom, right? Like freedom to say
Hmm.
what I want, freedom to believe, freedom. And I love being corrected. I love unlearning and relearning. And so as I kept seeing that like the system was not designed for me, right? Like the system
Right.
in the US it just wasn't like it was going to stifle me. And I always got away with, my sharp mouth sometimes because I was good at what I did, right? So I kind of like my friends joke around, they're like, Nichole, why would you? But I was really good at what I did. But then I couldn't be fully free, right? And so
Right.
I was like, okay. And then when I was living in Brazil, they started the Africa Business Center. So EY was saying, hey, there was a Vision 2020, which was not met by them. They had nothing to do with me, but they wanted to be a $50 billion, rev by 2020. And at the time, EY was at 25 billion. And the focus was like, well, in the US, we're kind of tapped out. Europe, we're pretty tapped out. So we can only really grow in emerging markets, right? So how do we grow in Africa, in Asia, LATAM? And so they started Africa Business Center and said, hey guys, we want people that have ties to the continent, go and do a rotation.
Hmm.
And so for me, I was like, oh, that's a safe bet. Like I can go do a rotation. And
Right.
I did a rotation in Brazil. So I had like my house that had the view of Christ the Redeemer out the window. Like I was like, I could do that. And so then I started talking to them, and I was going to be between South Africa and Nigeria. But then same thing, talk about universe. I got introduced to my former partners, had one conversation, and I was like, okay, I'm going to leave EY. And because I was like, this is a company that could be like Black excellence, right? Like this is a company that could be run by like Black, because some of the conversations I started having with people at EY, they're like, oh, but why don't you just go back to Brazil or go to Asia? Like your career can do better in these. I was like, or I can create a new version of what that looks like, right? Like I don't have to follow this specific path. And so, we have one conversation about,
Hmm.
hey, we're trying to build something that's amazing. We're trying to build something that could be globally impactful. We're actually trying to change the governments and how they work. We're actually trying to do this. And I was like, okay. So I sat with my family
Right.
and I was like, I have what I'm making at EY, and then I have what this company can afford. So I ended up taking, over 60% pay cut to join. So I went from being like, oh, it's gonna be comfortable, a simple 2-year rotation, float between South Africa and Nigeria, to let's just go all in, see what happens. But I think the thing I said to myself too was like, treat it like it was gonna be a 2-year rotation, right? Treat it like it would be that way,
Hmm.
knowing that one, I'm an American citizen, two, I can always go back to EY. EY would always be there. So if this experiment did not work out, then I knew I would have that backup option, if you will. So that was what gave
Right.
me the calm, I guess. And then like literally it was like, okay, once you got your house set, you got your car set, everything else in Nigeria you can you can kind of adjust to. And 4 years later, here I am.
I know. So that's the Venture Garden Group,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So what was that experience like?
Yeah, so I was there for 3 years, and I would say definitely like, it was definitely life changing in a sense. Like, the biggest thing that I think I got from it was I realized I'm a lot stronger and more resilient than I thought I was. I'm also a lot
Mm.
smarter I mean, I knew I was smart, but I realized I was like, I'm a heck of a lot smarter than I thought I was. I also realized I'm a lot more disciplined than I thought I was. So the experience for me, like, it was great to be able to see progress, like over the course of 3 years, to take a business that was primarily sector to driving it to primarily private sector, to be able to handle dealing with global investors, to be able to manage a board, to be able to grow out a team, right? To be able to grow out a company, to take something and start like making it, a beacon in like Nigerian and Pan African society. It was it was great in that sense. I also learned to be a lot more creative, right, in terms of how you
Yeah.
solve a problem. So usually, if you're in your U.S. textbook, like, oh, if this happens, this is the solution, but that doesn't work in the African context. So it's like, how do you get to creating 5, 10 different options, right, for making something work? Again, my career at EY in consulting was always about problem solving, but they just added
Hmm.
so many layers because you have to think about that here. You have to think about the fact that that solution may not have the infrastructure. So how do you work around that? You have to think about the fact that
Right.
you may not be able to rely on a particular partner. So how do you work around that, right? And so I think it made me, it was great in that sense that I got stronger, I got smarter, I got more disciplined, but I also was able to start getting that like freedom that I talk about, and building what this brand is, of someone that is disciplined, someone that is hardworking, someone that can actually truly solve your problems, which is led me to this next phase, right? And like I said, it honed in for me that the value system that I say is my value system truly is. Like, a lot of us can say, oh yeah, I would never, like, integrity is the number one thing. I would never do that. And then they're put in a situation and then they like forget that whole thing. Right. But what this showed me was that like I actually value the things that I said I valued, because you have things that you have to lose. You have things you have to walk away from, like, to be able to say, I actually am standing firm on this, right? Like, I actually believe in this. So it gave me so much more confidence in myself because I knew that I actually truly valued what I said I did, right? And the
Hmm.
networks. So that thing I talked about, timing with Agme from before, I now had a network of people that can build products. I have a network of legal. I have a network of like finance. I have all these networks which have been so crucial in what I'm building now, right? Like, which we didn't have before. So literally anything I
Right.
want to do now, I can, because those 3 years were very fundamental in building the network and building me.
It's very interesting. So I believe in life that we have experiences that kind of serve like catalysts,
Mm-hmm.
and they could be game changers in our lives.
Yeah.
And I wondered, in reading about your story, I read that you were part of the inaugural Obama Foundation Africa Leaders
Yeah.
class. And I wonder, was this a catalytic experience in her life? And if you can just talk to us a little bit about how you got on the
Mm-hmm.
program, what it's done for you, and if it has served as some sort of a catalyst in your life.
Absolutely. So like, you said the same thing. Like, there's always pivotal moments, right? I think in each of our lives that pushes us. And when in 2018, there was, I think it was the best year, but also the toughest year of my life. Like, from building out, Vibrating Valley to, running the accelerator. So the accelerator I ran, it was actually my essay for Obama Foundation. So they were like, if you had 3 months and unlimited funding, what would you do? And I wrote that I would create an accelerator focused on women tech founders that literally gave them everything they needed to be able to succeed, right? Like, from knowing their
Right.
numbers to being tight. And so I actually ended up creating the accelerator and running it in 2018. But when the application came out, and I was just like, I don't know if I'm going to get this, but I wrote my heart out. I was like, this is what I want to do. This is what problem I would solve. This is
Right.
why I think that I should be part of this class. And you end up, there were 10,000 applicants and there were 200 of us chosen. And so it was crazy to be part of that first class. We were from 44 different African countries. And what that did again was it now reminded me of why I chose
Hmm.
to come to Nigeria, was that I wanted to build something Pan-African. It reminded me that our
Right.
problems in Nigeria are not unique, right? So whether it's governance, whether it's power, whether it's around like finance
Right.
structures, whatever it is, we have similar problems. And why do countries like China or India win? China's looking at its 1.5 billion population. India's looking at its 1.2 billion population. Africa together is 1.3. they are able to build, billionaires, 2 or 3 billionaires a week, because they all have to do is succeed within their country. If we build this continent together, same problems across different ecosystems, we can build billionaires on the continent
Right.
that can actually have such a huge influence, right? So the foundation helped me start seeing that, connecting with my peers across a different continent, and then also just like shaping all of those ideas. And the best thing they did was like we had all these like leadership programs, and I'm like, I hate self-help books, by the way. Like, I know a lot of people read them. Like, all those things that I do not. I don't do self-help, any of these, like, whatever. Like, I was like, those things are so dumb. But then the foundation, like, put these people in front of us, teach us leadership of self and leadership of others. But they focus a lot on leadership of self. And you're like, well, of course, I lead myself. But it's really not about that. Like, it's how you talk to yourself. It's how you bring your thoughts, how you literally craft this future that you want, how you evaluate
Right.
options. So, Rachel Adams, like, she's my career coach now. Like, she's literally, and I'm that person before that would have been like, this is a fake career. I'm super serious, until I met with her. And she's like, are you going to, are you in resentment? Are you in excitement? Are you in this? Like, be honest with yourself. And what she did was she now had me make a list of everything that was frustrating me about
Right.
either my job, but also about the country. And then when you go through and make that list, it's like, which things can you accept? Because you can never thrive if you don't accept certain things. And which things can you not? So after I went through, I realized I could actually accept a lot
Right.
of these things about Nigeria because I had a way around it. But about where my role was and my job and the limitations, those are things that I couldn't. So what do I now do? So it's now like, how do you craft this next feature? That you take the things you've
Right.
accepted, but you now create this new thing, right? And so I did that. And so I started, structuring this, and I'm like, I think this is really exciting. I think I want to do this. And then I got to go to, the summit in Chicago, and of course, like,
Hmm.
I'm the one leader that now gets to meet with Barack Obama, my forever president. And so, like, they're like, oh yeah, you have like 10, 15 minutes with him backstage, just like talk. And I was like, okay, cool. That's what's up. So we sit there. So I'm trying to keep it together. But I literally was like, okay, so I had this idea. It's like, yeah, go for it. Like, why would you hold that limitation? Like, and I was like, yeah, Barack said that I should go ahead and bring this thing to life. So I'm gonna go ahead and bring this thing to life, right? And I'm glad I did, right? Like, so the foundation gave me the way to structure it. It gave me the tools. It gave me the validation that, like, I can, right? Like, everybody else started from somewhere and created a world that they knew was better. And then even when I started Chris, my first clients were fellow Obama leaders. I sit on the board of one of my Obama leaders, like, tech company, right? Like,
Right.
that network is still like inherent today. And then I got to be like, out of our 215 of us were chosen to be mentors of the 2019 class. So I got
Hmm.
chosen to mentor this new class
Nice.
as well, like, and just keep going in this journey with the foundation. So it's been really cool.
That's awesome. So the thing that President Obama asked you to go ahead and do was the Chrysalis
With
Capital,
starting Chrysalis,
starting
yes,
Chrysalis. Awesome. Awesome.
yeah,
So what is the Chrysalis or Chrysalis Capital?
yeah. So basically, under Chrysalis, this is what I now talk about. Africa has made me learn about complex structures. So
Right.
of course, you just start one company. So I started to start like two different sides of it. One side, which is our advisory business, which is something that I believe strongly in. I'm an operator, right? And I think that a lot of times, yes, we have all these amazing entrepreneurs, but people don't know, and I'm not saying people don't do, people just don't know all the things to do to make their businesses be institutions, to make it truly be able to scale, to be sustainable, to be bigger than them, right? It's always that entrepreneur that has to be in the shop every day. Otherwise, this isn't happening, or
Right.
doesn't know how to talk to investors, or doesn't know. So fundamentally, everything I did at EY, everything I did in terms of restructuring all the companies under VG Greenhouse was about making businesses more solid. So it's like the advisory business is super critical, and then making data driven decisions. But I can't ignore the fact that money is a critical tool,
Right.
right? That money has to be there because there's just not enough on the continent for really great ideas. So we have to have a fund side of our business, which is Chrysalis Capital. And so still investing again in early stage tech companies, primarily tech, because what I've now learned is that tech is just an enabler. It can be in agriculture, power, it doesn't matter what it is. Technology is just an enabler. And
Right.
we don't have the time and luxury to like go through all the boring stages the way the rest of the world has. We need to accelerate a little bit. And so even if I'm able to be that first check, that 50 grand, 100 grand, ideally going for to do up to 500 grand in a company, it can make a huge difference in being able to prepare them and being
Right.
able to structure them so that way they can actually grow, right? And especially if I want businesses to be Pan-African, like they're going to need that support. And so Chris is really about growing businesses into institutions. And literally, actually, on our deck, like it has Barack Obama's quote that says, Africa does not need more strong leaders, it needs strong institutions. That's literally what I'm saying is the drive behind all of this. This thing has to be bigger than all of us, right? If we're going to make Africa better, it's not about each one of us individually getting shine. It's about the continent, it's about the institution, it's about the things that we're building. And so how do we help companies get there from a structure perspective, but also money?
In terms of, I mean, it's very interesting as we're in a time where people are talking. There's a lot of conversation around gender balance, and as I was saying while we were in the green room, I read the paper that the IFC did, moving towards gender balance in PE funds, and there was a lot of conversation, about how Africa has the largest number of female entrepreneurs, but in the startup ecosystem, there's a really tiny, you can give us the figure, but there's a really tiny figure when it comes to the amount of women who are founders and CEOs of these startups. And I heard you say during one of your, I think it was a talk in Kigali, how investors invest in people that look like them.
Absolutely.
And the IFC paper also referenced this in terms of, this was more of a gender conversation. The IFC referenced that. And I wonder what you're seeing in the Nigeria, Africa space now that you're in it. And if this is something that Chrysalis, is going to try to address as it funds startups.
Yeah. So I mean, what you said was accurate. I think we don't have enough data that drills into Africa alone. So I'm going to talk about where they stay with women, right? So women get 2.2% of venture capital funding, Black women 0.2. Now, if we're saying Black women, that is Black women everywhere. So I think you can't even start comparing what that number looks like on the continent, right? And not because we're not entrepreneurial, not because we are not building great businesses, all of those types of things. It's just there's literally a gap, right, in terms of people viewing those resources. Like we've even seen, after my accelerator that I ran, a lot of like banks and everybody was like, oh, run an accelerator focused on women founders. And I was reading the terms. I was like, no one should sign on to this. They're offering, one of the banks here was offering like 2 million naira for like 10% of their business. I was like, that's crap. You would never offer that to men. You would never offer that to men. Right. And so like people just take advantage and those things happen. And that's why, if women don't know better about, hey, here's how I value myself. I've seen all of these things. Women always put their valuations lower. Women always go in and make their numbers more conservative. Women always go and do all of these types of things instead of being able to go and defend themselves. Right. Which is why I'm the biggest fan of data. Now, talk about what Chris was trying to solve. Yes, I've run an accelerator focused on women tech founders. Yes, my company is actually 80% women, right? But when I tell people, I'm like, if I go with the data and try to convince people based on the data, like when you're negotiating or trying to appeal to someone, yes, you can hope that they care about your humanity and you can hope that they care about, being good or being fair. But the way to appeal to them is like, and what's in it for them. So when you're going to LPs and saying, hey, I'm going to create this fund, it's like, it's less about like, oh, this is good for, for women and this is good, even though it's about this, how it makes you more money. And that's the same approach IFC took, showing that women fund managers, showing, the returns from women founders, all of those things, saying, hey, this is actually good for you numerically and not because it's just a feel good exercise. So both on our advisory company and on our fund, we have, things that we say are very important to us. And diversity of the team, of the board, and across all levels is super important. On the advisory side, we've literally placed people that are COOs, controllers. I think we've done the CFO in companies, and all the time I've only placed women. I placed one man in all of my clients' companies. I've only placed women in these positions just because the best people I know for the job just happen to be women as well. In our fund, 3 companies I've invested in, 2 out of 3 women were co-founders. The third one, we pushed the founders to get their next chief growth officer to be a woman, so that all of them in their C-suite team have women that are not only
Right.
there as figureheads, but actually significant stakeholders in each of these companies, right? Like when we talk about boards, people come to us and say, hey, help us put all this together. We literally give them profiles or reference them to organizations, people that have women in these positions. Now, again, it's because I think it's a smarter business decision. I think that you were talking about like
Hmm.
actively like working to change people's mind, but I'm like, if you believe in me, if you came to me as your advisor, as your investor, you obviously trust me as a woman. So trust that judgment when I'm telling you that this person is the best person for you to do this, right? Trust when I'm telling you that this is how you
Right.
should. And if you're telling me you don't know people in that network, no problem. I'll find them for you because
Right.
that's what matters. So I'm not charging for recruiting. I'm not, because I just think it's a better decision, right? And so for us, it's important that people are getting a different like mindset. I've had someone say, after working with us, they're like, "Man, you're just, like literally like the smartest woman I ever met." And I responded back, I was like, "Oh, you mean smartest person?" And they're like, I was like, no, I'm just checking. Like, did you mean one of the smartest person or just smartest woman? Because he's like, okay, well, I guess yeah, one of the smartest people that I was like, so like having to constantly like re-engineer their thoughts, do all of those
Right.
things. So if I can control it within my portfolio company, within companies we advise that are telling me, hey Nichole, help me present myself in this way, what I'm saying? Like that's how we start helping shift that. So the fund was not created exclusively to invest in women. And there's amazing, amazing funds that have launched that do just that. And I love it. Right.
Right.
But for us, I'm like, I'm going to hit you with the data that matters. And I'm going to show you that you don't even have, like, let it just be a part of your DNA. Let you just see that this is actually the right thing to do. Right. And the results that you're getting. And if you come to me for that advice, like, this is the direction I'm going to push you in.
Now that's a very interesting perspective. So you've been in Nigeria, what, like 4 years now?
Yes.
4 years. And the challenge of being a woman, being young, and running a business in Nigeria is an ongoing conversation, and I was wondering about your personal experience. What kind of stereotypes have you had to fight against or work against in
Mm-hmm.
Nigeria, and how have you stayed winning?
Yeah. It's so fascinating. Like thinking through a lot of like just experiences in Nigeria in the last 4 years, right? So I was actually having like it doesn't matter if people came to my office and saw me as CFO, it's still like as this small girl that's whatever, and like you still have to have that conversation. So either like when I first joined BGG, I was 29 and I was CFO, and the company had 150 employees, and people were like, who's this person? How can she da da da? And at the time, I think my dad came to visit me at the office, like one of because he's like, I remember he actually drove me to work like the first day, like I was going to school, like to drop me off, and then like he came in another day and was like, Dad was like, oh, and hey, that's how she got it. So like, for people that are in Nigeria, I mean, like my father is an actor here, so Richard Mofedamijo. He's an actor in Nigeria and like has been around forever. And so everyone was like, yes, that is how she got it. And I was like, okay, sorry. This is a finance role in a technology company. My father is an actor, producer. Like, please help me understand how this is linked. But that's what had to make sense to people, right? When I now went from like, I sold my 2015 Jeep Grand Cherokee in the US, was driving a Toyota for a couple years in Nigeria, but then I was like, oh, I'm gonna upgrade to an SUV. And hey, who bought her the car? It must be our father. It must be this. Da, da, da. And you're just like, you didn't complain when I drove a Corolla. You didn't think about the fact that I left a house and, and a nicer SUV in the US, but all of a sudden somebody had to have done ABC, right? Like that's just like, it's a thing. And even coming and starting my business, you have like people that will try to flirt with you, people that will try to cross boundaries. And so for a while, sometimes, I played dumb. Nigeria is just it's fascinating. And I think that once, because I'm a person that I let a lot of it roll off, and it doesn't, to not distract me from what I'm trying to do. Like I don't get
Right.
phased. by it, but it can be tough for a lot of people. Like, so one of the things that I did when I was at BGG that I was super glad I did was start something called the Garden Women's Network. And it was basically like, you know, we're in technology. There's not a lot of women in it. And I was seeing like a lot of women were resigning at a higher rate than, you know, men. And I'm like, if I'm here as CFO and people will make comments about how I look or how I this, imagine what people that are not CFO have to deal with. So the game that my like co-founder of the Garden Women's Network came up with was like everyone had, you know, toothpicks, right? Like everyone started with 5 toothpicks, and you would say a story, and if people related to you, they would give you a toothpick. The goal was to see who had the most at the end. So people were telling stories about like, oh, having to pee in traffic because it's Lagos, or, you know, tripping and falling in front of a crush, like all these funny things. And then, you know, someone told a story about like basically being like sexually harassed or assaulted at work. And when I tell you, every girl or woman in that room gave her a toothpick, like my heart broke, right? And I'm like, yo, like, no matter, like, it's just, it's bad. Like, it's bad. Like, this ecosystem is bad. And a lot of stories are coming up now, and people are getting more confident to share that. It's forcing a lot of men in the ego, the tech bros, to try to start reevaluating how they treat women or the assumptions they make. And it's also women at the same time too. Like, be careful of the assumptions you make of other women that are trying to grind and get where they are. So like, it's tough, but I have to continue to succeed, right? I have to, someone like me who I don't care, like, you're not going to do anything to me. I have to keep using my voice, right? To make sure that I create that safe space. So like I said, you know, my company was 80% women. When stuff was happening in the tech ecosystem, we had a conversation about it. And I was like, if a client ever opens their mouth and says anything about company, y'all let me know. Because they were like, yeah, Nichole, we know you will find. I was like, exactly. Like, I do not play that. Like, I was like, if anybody comes in, like, whatever it is, you know what I'm saying? Like, we have to do better. And like, we can't just assume, and the society just doesn't give enough opportunities. I was like, women are already paid less. And so then you're working your butt off and you're just put in these weird positions, right? And like, no, it's not cool. Like, it's tough, but I'm grateful that I have the background that I do, that I have the personality that I do, that I can let a lot of it roll off, and I know how to handle myself. It's definitely a lot easier now than it was, you know, when I was way younger. Like, I mean, it goes all the way back to Nigeria, to EY, and people saying, oh yeah, you got into the school because you're Black. Oh, you got into this program because you're Black. I was like, no, I'm just smarter. Like, you know, it is what it is. Like, that's how it's just gonna be. So yeah.
Wow. Thanks for sharing that. Thank you so much for sharing that. Just one last question. So what's next for Nichole?
So in terms of what's next, again, I always say the, you know, term world domination, right? It's been great growing this company and serving clients across multiple African countries, Europe, US. The key push for me is just really showing African dominance, emerging market dominance in what we do in building technology. So going to continue to grow Chris, the advisory business, continue to grow the fund, and give opportunities to founders who typically are overlooked. Even though we're seeing, again, a lot of the world is talking about the fact that, like, oh, Black Lives Matter and invest in Black businesses, do all of those. It's going to be a lot to businesses in the US, right? Or businesses in Europe, where it's majority versus investing that capital onto the continent, which has all of these Black people with amazing ideas that just don't get the opportunity to shine, right? So like, that's my job, to help give them that voice, right? To be able to help them kind of grow beyond that. And so really for me, it's about creating more safe spaces, creating more opportunities for women, for Africans, and then just continuing to be just like myself and showing people that there's no one way to succeed. There's no one look to what success is or one path or whatever. Like, you can literally be unapologetically you, right? And you can use that to continue growing.
That was Nichole Yembra, founder and managing partner, the Chrysalis Capital. You know, we celebrate that Africa has the highest rate of female entrepreneurs, which is true. But in the startup ecosystem, the reality is a little different. I read that of 44 African startups who raised over $1 million, only 8 were co-founded by at least one woman, and only 3 had a female CEO. Those are staggering statistics, and because of that, we celebrate people like Nichole who are intentionally working to create more diversity in the startup ecosystem. As always, thank you for listening and for subscribing to our podcast. If you haven't, please do so on Apple Podcasts or on Google Podcasts. You're searching for African Business Stories. If you like this episode or others, do give us a rating and please write us a review. I am Nichole Koye, and you have been listening to African Business Stories.